Hey, what's going on, viewers of the Fantasy Flavor Podcast? Welcome back. My name is Dylan Thomas, and today we're here back again with the one-on-one interview series here with one of my favorite people on the fantasy football dynasty Twitterverse. That's a mouthful. We have Dynasty Kyle. You can find him on Twitter at DynastyFF_Kyle M. There's, I believe, 2 Twitter accounts for that. Once again, that is at DynastyFF_Kyle M. There's 2 of them. That's the one you want to follow because the other one's currently inactive. But we'll get into a little bit about that later. How are you doing today, Kyle?
I am doing great. Thanks you so much for having me on. And yeah, I'm looking forward to getting into that little Twitter issue because that has been the biggest pain in the butt over the past couple of weeks. But thank you again for having me on. I really appreciate it.
No, thank you. Thank you. I really appreciate it. Taking time out of your day, really nice where you're at right now. A little jealous. It's hot here too, I guess, but so let's start off with that. You had a little bit of what I like to call trouble with Twitter. So, can you tell me what the heck happened with this whole Twitter catastrophe you had?
All right. So one random day, literally just a random day, nothing special about it. I was on Twitter. I immediately get this pop-up saying that there's been suspicious activity on my Twitter account that I need to, log in, change my password, and then everything will be smooth and I'll be good to go. So I was like, oh my gosh, this is weird. Change my password, easy enough. So I wanted to see what this weird, problem was that was going on that took me out of my account. So I asked my friend to go on my account, see what happened, and 1,000 people, like 1,000 people that following, boom, just disappeared. Like my follower count went down from 1,500 to 500 or whatever number it was, down by 1,000. I was like, okay, what is going on? Like, is this a glitch or someone just unfollowing everyone that I'm following? So I was like, okay, it must be a glitch. So I go on my phone to change my password. And to change your password on Twitter, you need to enter either your phone number or your email, both of which I had entered on my Twitter account, for security purposes. Go to enter that information and it says that my phone number is invalid, that my email account's invalid. Somehow my information from my Twitter account was removed to where it was impossible for me to log back on. I did everything I could. I reached out to Twitter admin. Literally no one got back. It was just a bunch of automated messages. So after about one day of literally just like horrifying, I was upset. I was like, man, all this work over the past 2 months, all those followers, they're all gone. I just decided to scrap it and start over. So that's where I am today.
Yeah, and I looked maybe like 20 minutes ago, and I noticed you have like 1,700 followers or something around that right now on Twitter. I think a little over. So make sure to go follow him back because he was on the hashtag Road to 2K. He finally hit it, and then Twitter happened.
Yep.
Those hackers. Good thing no one's hacking my 100 whatever followers. Hopefully not. I'd be a little mad. I'd be like, why me, man? Why me? But that's quite a story. It's quite an unfortunate story. I guess something you can laugh about now since you've practically kind of almost rebuilt your way back on Twitter. Honestly, it took you not too long, honestly, just to keep it real. So I guess you learned a lesson. Stuff happens, and you rebuilt pretty impressively. So props to you, man.
Thank you. No, I appreciate it. Yeah, I basically learned there's a feature on Twitter that every time you log in, it sends a password to your phone. You have to enter it and it'll actually let you in your Twitter account. I didn't do that before, but I'm doing it now, and I would definitely suggest everyone do that because it makes me feel so much more secure. And yeah, my first day on my new account, I basically put out a PSA saying, "Yo, what's up, guys? This is my new Twitter account. My old one got hacked. Like, here's to getting back to 2K." And before I went to bed that night, that was at like 4:00 p.m. Before I went to bed that night, I was just over 600 followers because literally everyone that was following my old account was rallying, just like, everyone go follow Kyle, like, new account, go follow him. We love his work. And it was like such a surreal experience. It was so cool to have everyone, have my back. Like,
yeah, of course. I think the community likes you. Not only are you active You seem to like a lot of posts. Well, maybe that's just because you like all of my posts, which is flattering. But it seems like you're pretty active on Twitter, which I think is super important. You write for Dynasty Nerds, I believe.
Yep,
Probably.
and also Dynasty Football Factory.
Oh, those are two pretty big Dynasty names there. So make sure to check out his work. I'll link those in the description. I'll dig them up. But yeah, that's awesome. So I guess my question here, this is just for me, but I'm sure anyone here looking to grow maybe their brand could take advice from this. And my question for you, Kyle, is what's your biggest tip? Because you grew your Twitter account pretty quickly. I mean, it was very impressive. Both Twitter accounts honestly grew pretty quickly, in my opinion, at least quicker than mine. So I'm not saying you know what I mean though. Like you grew your platform with your writing that grew as well. What's your biggest tip for spreading around your content, growing your content, popularizing it? What's kind of your tip for someone like me, a smaller name, to get more popular?
I would say no doubt when I first started writing, what I wanted to do was basically have as many eyes possible on my work as I could. The first article that I wrote was, I'm not sure if you remember, but it was for the Fantasy Life blog. It was, analyzing the top 5 running backs for the 2019 NFL draft. And I spent, hours and hours, like literally hours, longer than I've ever spent on anything I've ever written, to basically, this is my first piece. I want it to be awesome. And I came out, I released it, and right when I did, the biggest thing, some advice that was given to me, I don't remember by who, but it was awesome advice, is to not be afraid to just slide into DMs. Not going to get a perfect response rate, but I took the link to my article at that point, sent it to probably my 45 followers, I think, because I had Twitter for a few days at that point. I think my 45 followers really just said, "Hey, what's up, man? Like, thank you for following my account. I just want to let you know that I'm really trying to, get my name out there, and I'd really appreciate, a read or a retweet. Like, anything helps. Like, thank you so much, my man." And it got to the point where I DM'd probably the 45 people I was following, in addition to a few others. So I probably ended up DMing about 60 people. Like, I want to say 58 of those people retweeted and got back to me and said, "Yeah, dude, like, can't wait to check it out," or "Amazing work." And at that point, kept going, kept getting bigger, and that kind of helped me get where I am today. So that would definitely be the number one tip: is there is no shame in the DMs and saying, "Hey, man, like, this is what I'm doing. I'm really trying to get my name out there. Like, can you help me? Like, I'll return the favor whenever I can." There's zero shame in that. That's definitely my biggest tip.
Yeah, guess follow-up question is, did you only do that once, or has that something you've continued doing now since you've gotten bigger? Did you do it a couple times and stop?
That was actually a one-time thing for me. Once I shared it and then it got some retweets, it jumped up from about 40-some followers to 350-ish that day, which was, again, like, super flattering. And I was like, okay, I have this following now. Like, I'm going to build it. I can do this. But I would not have been there if I did not slide in those DMs time.
Hey, you hear that? Not only ladies you need to slide into those DMs for, you can also slide into those fantasy football experts to get those, get that publicity. So
all types of DMs to slide into.
All types of DMs. So you DM sliders, you got some more work here to do, according to Kyle. So I kind of want to move on here and talk a little bit more about yourself. So if you're not familiar with Kyle's Twitter page, one, why are you watching my video? Because you probably are. You should be definitely following him if you're following me. Just in my opinion, he puts out such great content. So you're kind of a film guy, it seems, to me at least, right? If that's correct. And I noticed the one thing, and I like when we can talk about something different, that especially with film, because I've had two very different film guys on. I've had Angelo and Ray, who I know you're both familiar with. You're familiar with both those names.
For
great
sure.
guys, right?
Oh yeah, I
and
love them.
They had completely different views on film, right? So Angelo was really like, I'm going to talk about the processing of the player, like kind of their mental strength, kind of how they kind of read stuff like that. And he recently tweeted that out, a whole little thing on that, which is awesome because we just talked about it in the pod, and that's why he tweeted that out. So I feel a little special. And Ray kind of talked about traits, and now something that Brandon or Angelo is kind of like, traits. I kind of stray away from the traits, and Ray's like, he was just talking traits to me, which is two respectable ways to tackle it. Now, I don't know which side of that you're on there. I think it could be a little bit of both, arguably. I've seen you talk about some traits. Bill's talked about some mental processing things. But the one thing you do differently from both those gentlemen is, let me tell you, you grab your pencil, you grab your paper, you handwrite this stuff instead of typing it. In a world where we just use computers and phones all the time. What's up with that, Kyle?
All right, well, first off, Ray, that dude does some amazing work, especially with Devi. Absolutely fantastic work. But Brandon, my man Brandon Angelo, that dude is absolutely nuts. I mean, that content is literally insane. Like, he does such a good job that I honestly don't think anyone else in the industry does anything like him. Like that tweet that you were talking about that he posted yesterday. I mean, that stuff is really next level stuff. So shout out to them. But if I had to say which side of the spectrum I'm on, I'm probably going to say neither. I think I'm going to give you a third perspective here.
Oh no.
See, the one big thing that is important to me when watching film, like I've had people slide into my DMs because they kind of like the way I players talk about how, traits I've seen when watching film, like things I've taken away from watching film. Answer is pretty much the same every single time when people just say, how do you watch film? Like you said, pull it up on my computer, pull it up on my phone. If I'm at work and my boss is looking, don't tell her. But I'll grab my pen, grab my paper, and I cannot understate. I literally just write what I see. All I do is I write what I see. If I see something that I like, I write it. If I see something that I don't like, I write it. I just see something, I'll write it. I usually will mark down exactly what video I'm watching and the exact time frame that the thing that I'm writing down happens, so I can go back and look at it anytime, because in a year you're gonna forget about exactly what happened there. So let's say I'm taking notes on Damian Harris, just a random player. I mean, it's on my page, Harris, rookie notes. And I'll have a little bullet point, Damian Harris versus Ole Miss. And then you'll see, at 54 seconds, he did this. At 119, he did this. I just write down what I see. Like, I don't try to overanalyze anything. I feel like that's a big, not issue with people watching film, but kind of like a miss is I think people are trying to do too much. Just write down what you see. You analyze it later. You say, oh, okay, I wrote down 6 times that he stems very well off the end of his route. Like maybe this is a huge strength of his. Like there you go, that's a strength. But I don't try to overthink it. So that I can't even really overcomplicate it. That's just how I watch film.
That's I think that's a little cool, because when we talk about film, especially because I feel like a lot of times we kind of throw statistical analysis versus film analysis, kind of like they're opposite sides of the spectrum almost. So when we have those two, right, I feel like film, you could argue, is a superior method, but the problem is with film that you're the one, like, while the film itself is not like type of biased, you as the viewer are biased in the fact that you can confirm something you already thought, such as confirmation bias. You know what I mean?
Exactly.
So while the film itself, right, isn't, it's just there technically. Like if there's a perfect non-biased analysis, and that's that, and it could be like the most superior method. But that's why people miss on film, because there's either something biased, or they looked at another successful prospect, maybe like for example, let's say you were high on Dorial Green-Beckham, right?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe you looked at like Mike Evans, another big, tall guy, not exactly the same, but you know what I mean. And you see like, wow, Dorial Green-Beckham, scouting him out of college could succeed in the NFL because of like what Mike Evans, how Mike Evans operated.
Uh-huh.
But that's kind of like an example of that bias. So I like how you're doing it, and this is the point I'm trying to get at, is you're just kind of writing down just what the hell happens, and you're going to take that and then maybe do your own analysis, but you're going to kind of just stick it true to what the heck happens, because I think that's super important what you do there to try to avoid bias.
Yeah, for sure. And the hardest part, I would say, is just being honest. Like I came in to this upcoming rookie class, N'Keal Harry. Love him, wide receiver one. He was my one in the 2019 class, late 2017. So he came in, nothing changed, still my 101. Watching film on him, as much as I love him, I have to be honest. If I'm watching him and I'm seeing that he's struggling to separate, instead of saying, you know, he is showing minor signs of, lacking quickness. However, he looks great doing this, this, this. No, just down. He struggles to separate. That's the biggest thing with film that people struggle with, is that it's difficult to be honest with yourself if you love a player. You try to take something that's negative and spin it positive, and that's what I think statistics and analytics are there for. They're there to correct you a little bit. So they're definitely an important part of the equation as well.
Yeah, I definitely think at least one day if I can learn to watch film, I want to use both of them. I kind of do they have the film? Do they have the stats to back it up? Use those two in favor with each other. And since you brought up N'Keal Harry, why don't we just get straight into talking about some actual fantasy football players here? Starting with my 101 too. He's my 101 pre-draft, and then as a Pats fan, he went to the Patriots, and there were a lot of f-bombs after he was drafted of excitement. I didn't expect them to draft a wide receiver the first round, and it was quite awesome to see him go to a successful organization. One, I'm going to guess as a Jets fan, isn't your favorite organization.
Definitely not. Definitely not.
That must have hurt a little bit to see him drafted there, at least as a Jets fan. But can you talk a little bit about, first, before you talk about why you like N'Keal Harry so much, since you brought up the separation, for me, it seems like that's his only really red flag. Maybe other than Tom Brady's getting old. Those seem to be like the two anti-N'Keal Harry arguments that people throw out there, right? But I mainly want to talk about the separation. Is the separation, because he ran a 4.53, he had a 90th percentile burst score, I believe, athletically. So right, he's athletic, and 4.53 should be enough to separate. So why doesn't he separate? Is it something that's fixable? Is it something that's not fixable, and he's going to have a hard time overcoming it in the NFL? His main flaw is separation. Talk about it for me quickly here.
All right, for sure. Well, looking at N'Keal Harry trying to separate from defenders, it doesn't really make sense because it's not like he's slow and it's not like he's unathletic. We saw him run the 3-cone, like we saw him run the 40-yard dash, and he was high percentile in both of those. But watching his film, he struggles to separate because one thing that I found, in addition to lack of, he somewhat struggles with rounding off his routes occasionally, and that lack of sharp cuts makes it easier for defenders to keep up with him. So you will see N'Keal Harry, if he lines up on the outside, that maybe he takes too many stutter steps at the line of scrimmage, trying to get cute and juke out the defender, when in reality he's not moving. Those are wasted movements. Like, that's one thing that I had to be honest with myself watching film, is okay, this guy sure will get it fixed when he moves on to the NFL level, especially with Patriots wide receiver coaches. But that is definitely a red flag. I'm looking at the separation and if he can overcome it. I'm not sure if he's going to be able to overcome the separation issues. I don't think he will be able to, because wide receivers don't usually immediately just gain short area quickness that they didn't have before. But the fact that he doesn't necessarily have the greatest separation skills, I don't think is as red flag as many people think it is. And for example, if we go back to 2017, look at a wide receiver that was drafted in the second round, right around N'Keal Harry's draft range. And this wide receiver also struggled with separation. He has a very similar body type to N'Keal Harry, but in college he played on the outside and on the inside. On the outside, you saw that he struggled with separation, like I said earlier. He had solid long speed, like I said, solid hands and solid athleticism, just like N'Keal Harry. But when you put this wide receiver, who I will soon reveal, in the slot, you saw that his big body was able to overpower these slot corners. He didn't necessarily need that short area quickness. He was operating with a relatively low average depth of target. And then moving on to the NFL, we see that the receiver that I'm talking about, Juju Smith-Schuster, who operates mostly out of the slot in the NFL, become one of the best receivers in the league, if not top 7 or 8. So looking at a guy like that outside, and he'll overpower defensive backs, strength, speed, just football acumen, hands, similar to the way N'Keal Harry will. He's not going to burn you on the outside because he's not going to, pull a Keenan Allen and juke you out of your shoes. Harry is a very similar player. And while he will improve on the separation issues because that's just what players progress, he's not going to, fully overcome them. But I don't think that's as big a problem as people think it is.
I definitely think that's, as a Patriots fan, I'm excited. Just to have N'Keal Harry there, finally a high pedigree wide receiver, at least coming out as drafted by New England under contract for the next 5 years if they want him. So he's going to be there for a while. So I think that could be good for his development. At least he went to a coaching staff that can help him fix this stuff. As while I agree with you, he's not all of a sudden going to be an elite separator, someone like Tyreek Hill just burning you down the field, which isn't at all what N'Keal Harry does.
Mm-hmm.
At least hopefully, if you're telling me that it's kind of like the footwork off the line of scrimmage, that sounds like coachably. That part of it can be fixed. So while 4-5-3, it isn't like a 4-4, so it's not like he's going to be burning people on, flyer outs or whatever. Seems like at least he can get a little more open. And regardless if he's open or not, hopefully Tom Brady trusts him enough to just put the ball up high where he's going to have a vertical and the body size of a 6'2", 6'3", 228 wide receiver, just go pinpoint and grab that ball. So he doesn't even need to be straight up open. Like some guy can be draped all over him, but if you throw it high enough, he's just going to go grab the ball. So that doesn't really matter.
For sure. And while you were talking, I was looking on my phone for an old tweet that I posted, and I was able to find it, pairing DK Metcalf's NFL comps with N'Keal Harry's NFL comps based on their projected NFL draft range. This is a RotoViz tool, by the way. Fantastic job. But looking at N'Keal Harry's comps, this is pre-draft, his draft profile, production, all his metrics, everything. Pre-draft, N'Keal Harry was selected in the first round based on historical comps, based on analytics, based on everything. These are his 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 closest NFL comps, or, people that we can project his outcome to be similar to. All right, so we have Alshon Jeffrey, Allen Robinson, Michael Thomas, Mike Evans, Juju Smith-Schuster, Sammy Watkins, and Kenny Golladay. So if that is not the most impressive list of comps you've ever heard in your entire life, then I don't know what is.
Yeah, for me, seems very safe. And N'Keal Harry is my 101. I don't like taking wide receivers 101. The running back's going to give me the more immediate production, the more immediate value, so we can sell him high or just keep him. You know what I mean? Like, he's going to give me more of what I want immediately. And you're always trying to win every single year you can in fantasy football leagues, even dynasty leagues. It doesn't make sense to want to lose every year. But N'Keal Harry is just so much safer than any other prospect. You can argue he has a pretty high ceiling, especially let's say Edelman gets hurt, which would break my heart. I love Edelman. N'Keal Harry gets moved into the slot. 6'2", 228, New England wide receiver in the slot. Pull up the Wes Welker numbers. Pull up the Julian Edelman numbers. He's going to produce an elite level. And even so, he's just super safe. And he has a high ceiling too, so 100%. I'm in on N'Keal Harry. You're in on N'Keal Harry. Well, I kind of want to talk a little bit more 2019 here before we move on to 2020, which I'm excited for. There's two kind of wide receivers that people were really high on, that people might have had as their 101, or maybe the first wide receiver taken in the 2019 NFL draft, right? Those guys were Hakeem Butler and DK Metcalf. And these two players have something in common that happened in the draft. Whew! They slid, man. They were sliding down like one of those big slides you see at almost a carnival or something. Whoosh! They slid, especially Hakeem Butler. He slid. It was crazy. So my question here is for you. I don't know how high or low you were on these guys pre-draft, but why do you think these guys slid so much? For people like Matt Waldman, who pounded the table and was like, this is the best wide receiver I've ever scouted. Reminds me of A.J. Green, the next A.J. Green. DK Metcalf, the next Calvin Johnson, the next Josh Gordon. You know what I mean? Why did these guys slip so much compared to their pre-hype kind of status.
All right, well, I'll start with Hakeem Butler. I found, and I'm not sure if you've seen my recent tweets about Hakeem Butler, but coming into the NFL draft, I was one of the lowest people on Twitter on Hakeem Butler. Not that I disliked the player, his story fantastic. Like seems like he came in, I want to say 0-star recruit. I'm not even sure what it was, but it was something absurd. And he's built himself up to, this stud receiver in college football. And you look at him, I want to say 6'5", just like monster frame, crazy catch radius. But you take a bit of a deeper look and you look at his college stats before this past season. A bit ago, back when, I'm not even sure if you remember, but when Allen Lazard was drafted in the NFL draft, they're a 7th-round pick, I believe, or undrafted, and he immediately fizzled out of the league. Well, Hakeem Butler played behind Allen Lazard on the depth chart, and he just could not get snaps over him. So, boom, like right away, that is a red flag for me. A very important metric for me when I'm looking at players, college players, is early collegiate production, breakout age. I want these guys to overtake the receivers in front of them, especially if the receivers in front of them aren't even NFL caliber receivers. So while it's nice that Hakeem Butler broke out when he was, I want to say, 22 in college, I'm looking for the guy with the 18.5-year-old breakout age. I'm looking for the Amari Coopers, the Corey Davises, the N'Keal Harrys, who I want to say has a 96th percentile breakout age. I want to say it's 18.7. You look at a guy like Hakeem Butler, and not only do I not love his film, he had a lot of bads. I didn't necessarily like his routes, and one thing that really bothered me is for a 6'5" receiver, you would think that he'd be able to push around smaller corners, but he was constantly bumped off his routes. Just something that I'm really not looking for in a 6'5" receiver is lack of physicality. So coming in, Hakeem Butler was not ranked extremely highly in my rankings, and when he fell into day 3 of the NFL draft, even though it was the first pick, still technically day 3 of the NFL draft, he immediately fell out of my top 20 rookies. Just not even someone I'm considering in the top 20. And in Superflex tight end premium leagues, he is a 3rd-round pick for me. So I imagine that I will be having no shares of Hakeem Butler. I just didn't really like him coming in, and the draft kind of confirmed that for me. And then if we're moving on to DK Metcalf, I am a huge fan of AJ Brown around game. He was my wide receiver 2 coming in. He's currently my 105 in terms of rookies in non-superflex leagues. DK Metcalf's film, he's the perfect example. You watch the highlights, he's probably 101. Watch the film, and he's probably a 1st-rounder. You turn on the highlight tape and you see this monstrous man who's literally built like Adonis, just like chiseled from stone. He's running by defenders, he's stiff-arming defenders, he's making these crazy high point catches in the back of the end zone to win the game. Like, oh my gosh, like this is Josh Gordon. Like this is absolutely incredible. Then you turn on the film and you see, oh my gosh, like that game where he got that crazy touchdown, that was his only catch, or that was one of 2 catches. You watch the film and you see that, when I mentioned N'Keal Harry earlier, he stutter steps at the line of scrimmage, tries to do too much at the line of scrimmage. DK Metcalf tries to do too much in and out of breaks. Like when you watch a receiver, he should be taking 2 steps max when running his routes. I mean, you turn on the film, literally have your jaw drop when you see that DK Metcalf took 7 steps to juke out a defender and turn right. It's just routes are rounded. He stops before he starts again. A little robotic in his catching motion to me, which is, when I say I just see stuff and I write it down, that's something I wrote down a few times. Just, looks robotic or doesn't look smooth, looks clunky. So coming in, those were definitely not 2 guys that I was very high on. I was lower than consensus. Both fell into the NFL draft. That gave me a little pat on the back in my process, kind of thinking, okay, maybe I'm doing something right here. Like maybe I'm kind of on the right page.
Yeah, well, one round of applause here for
Thank
you
you.
being right on both of them sliding. DK, unfortunately, still is my rookie wide receiver 2. I'm not happy about it. It's just kind of, I don't like the class outside of the top 4. And for me, I always bring this up. While people were telling you to kind of trade back for those 2020 picks, I'm like, maybe you can trade up in this draft because if it's kind of like a bad class, there's going to be some nice names on the top, and then it's going to be a whole bunch of players that could hit. They're like little engines that could, you know what I mean? Like, there's going to be a lot of those that were kind of like, dang, player X landed in great landing spot. And, it just kind of never happened. So, props to you there for going against consensus there. Granted, I always felt like people were either high on like a Hakeem Butler and then low on a N'Keal Harry. I always kind of felt like those two were kind of like, you had one or the other. You're either like an N'Keal guy or you're a Hakeem guy. And us N'Keal guys, me and you, we're kind of rubbing our hands right now saying, where's Hakeem Butler at? He's not drafted yet. But
and I was gonna say if you don't mind, it's, as you may have seen on Twitter over the past few days, it's awesome to be right, like I think I was on Metcalf and Butler, but it is more important to be wrong and to realize why you were wrong. Take a super quick second here to mention my wide receiver 3 heading into the NFL draft, my man Kelvin Harmon, who I was very, very wrong about heading into, I want to say, he was a 6th-round pick by the Redskins. I did not understand that fall. I still don't really understand that fall. That was definitely a big miss of mine. One thing it taught me is when he tested very, very poorly at the combine, showed that he was not very athletic, very low percentile in everything, I believe. I think I focused a little too much on the film, a little too much on the production. I thought, why does this guy need to be blazing fast if he's able to, box out corners and use his body and portray this incredible body control? If he tested a few, milliseconds too slow in the 40-yard dash, that's okay. Like, he still has these traits. It showed me that maybe I should not necessarily put more weight into the combine, but realize that the NFL puts more weight into the combine than I think they do. So that's definitely something I can improve upon in the future. Definitely an instance in which I was wrong.
Yeah, Kelvin Harmon, someone I was a little higher on, and then I think the hype I knew he was going to have a bad combine, and then people had good combine. Like a good combine, some great combines, like N'Keal Harry had a good one, A.J. Brown had a great one, So he kind of slipped off for me. So I think I had him as like a late first rounder. Unfortunate. I mean, it's a good landing spot. I mean, Washington, he really has no competition, to be honest. But he also has no draft capital. Could be cut, honestly, if they wanted to cut him. Because, just a 6th-round draft capital, he's going to be an outlier if he succeeds in the National Football League. And even if he succeeds, it might only be for like a year or two. It's not going to be a long-term asset because those late-round guys could break out and give you some nice production. But then I'm always like, for Philip Lindsay, I'm always like sell high because these later guys, they're either like Hall of Famers, like there's no middle ground, or they're going to do it for a year or two and they're just going to vanish from the league. So I want to move on here, get to something I'm very excited about. I don't know how excited the community is here for it, but the hype's crazy, so I have to assume there's a lot of positive energy when it comes to the 2020 NFL draft class. I mean, I know you're pretty big on it. I know pretty much anybody who is a little bit into Devy or hardcore Dynasty fan is super, super into this draft class. So I have a multi-part question here for you. It's a big question. I want you to take your time with it, really break it down, if that's okay with you.
Let's get it.
So I asked you a question in the DMs, right? Here I am sliding in the DMs. I took the advice before I even got the advice. Look at me. So I asked you for a favor, and you gave me a list, and we'll get into that list later of kind of player comps. But I was kind of like, can you kind of talk to me a little bit about why 2020, in your opinion, is so good? Do I buy the first? Should I really try to target those firsts? Should I target maybe the later picks, the seconds, the thirds, the fourths? Because we saw with this draft class, those later picks maybe aren't as valuable. There's only like 4 really good running backs that got great spots in this class. Then the rest of it's like, well, if player A gets injured, then maybe, one of these running backs. But this class, rich on running backs. So to put it back here to the question, should I invest in this class? Where does this class stack up to other, NFL draft classes? Stack up maybe to a 2014 and 2015, some of the more recent classes, right? And what picks should I invest in? Should I go to buy out those first? Should I, try to stray away from consensus and buy later picks? Take it away from me, Kyle.
All right, for sure. Well, we'll start on your first question. Invest. I don't want to, drag this question on, so I'm just going to say yes. Looking at this class, doing the work that I've done on this class, I don't like feeding into hype trains, but I'm going to here because I believe that this class is everything that we believe that it is going to be. I mean, you look at the top receivers in this class, and you see guys like Jerry Jeudy, you see guys like Laviska Shenault, you see Tyler Johnson, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins. I mean, you see these players, and you're like, yep, this guy would be my wide receiver 2 in 2019. This guy would be my wide receiver 1 in 2019. If I were to go through my 2020 wide receivers, I want to say that I would take Jeudy wide receiver 1. Let's say for comparison purposes, I'm going to compare the 2019 class to the 2020 class. It's always good to compare current classes with future classes. My wide receiver 1, I'm taking Jerry Jeudy. Wide receiver 2, I'm taking N'Keal Harry. And then I honestly think I'm taking 5 or 6 2020 receivers. That's how good I think this class is. Moving on to running backs, my RB1, the most talented running back in this class, in my opinion, is David Montgomery. I would personally take Josh Jacobs first in rookie drafts just based off draft capital and projected usage. But my RB1. Wait, hello?
Hi, we can hear
Hello,
you.
Dylan?
Hi.
Sorry, my computer freaked out. It cut me off.
Oh, you're fine. You're fine. You were just talking about, I believe the 2020 running backs. Can you break those
Okay.
down?
Yeah, did you hear the whole thing?
Yeah, I heard it up till those running backs. So can you
Okay.
just start from there? Is that
Yeah,
good?
my bad. Yeah,
No,
sorry.
you're fine. Can't
I was
help
on.
technology.
Yeah, my computer beeped and I was like, oh God, what happened? Okay, yeah, I'll just go ahead and start again. All right, we good?
Yeah, go ahead.
All right. All right, and then you move on to look at these 2020 running backs. And looking at the 2019 running backs, I'm looking at David Montgomery, who was my RB1 pre-draft in terms of talent. I'm still taking Josh Jacobs over him in rookie drafts because I think the draft capital and the opportunity is going to be there. So just looking through my 2020 backs here, I would honestly have Josh Jacobs outside of my top 5 running backs, which is crazy. There are 5 running backs that I would take in the 2020 class over Josh Jacobs. And we'll say there are a few running backs on the fence. So I'll go ahead and mention guys like Cam Akers, Eno Benjamin, J.K. Dobbins. You could all argue that, maybe those guys should be ahead of Jacobs, should not be, but I am extremely impressed by all of them, and we'll get more into Eno Benjamin later. But there is absolutely no doubt in my mind that I'm taking Travis Etienne, my 2020 RB1 out of Clemson, DeAndre Swift, my 2020 RB2 out of Georgia, and Jonathan Taylor, my 2020 RB3 out of Wisconsin, ahead of any back in the 2019 class. And that is not an exaggeration. That is just purely production, skill, film, analytics, stats, everything. So basically breaking it down to both positions, the 2020 class is significantly stronger than the 2019 class in both the running back and wide receiver. If we're comparing it to other classes, I think not only is this class top heavy, but I see about 7 guys in this class that I think could immediately step into the NFL and take over a starting role. As out real quick, we have ETN, Jonathan Taylor, DeAndre Swift, Cam Akers, Eno Benjamin, Najee Harris, and J.K. Dobbins. I'm not sure if I mentioned him, either 6 or 7, but I believe that those guys can immediately step in and have a starting role in the NFL. And we definitely did not see a class like in 2019. I don't believe we really saw a class like that in 2018. So I'm going to compare this running back class to the 2017 running back class when we saw Leonard Fournette, Joe Mixon, Dalvin Cook, Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Kareem Hunt. We saw all of those guys who at some point either were or still are absolute dynasty studs. So that's going to be my comparison for this running back class, just because I see between 5 to 7 guys that could immediately make an elite impact. Then if we're looking at wide receiver, you have studs like Jerry Jeudy, you have studs like Laviska Shenault, CeeDee Lamb, T. Higgins, like I mentioned earlier. I don't want to compare this class to the 2014 class because I'm not. I'm not going to do that because the 2014 class had numerous very high first round picks. I want to say 3 or 4 top 15 picks. It's impossible to expect that on any given year, so I'm not going to quite compare it to 2014. But from a talent perspective, I think it's comparable. Looking at this top talent, I mean, Jerry Jeudy is, in my opinion, top 5 receiver in college football, potential NFL draft prospect since 2011. Just absolutely incredible. So comparing to other classes, I would say running backs, we're looking at 2017. I think there are a bunch of guys that can immediately make an impact. For 2014, I mean, for wide receivers, I'm going to compare it to 2014. I would say expect slightly less draft capital. In terms of talent, I think we're looking at fairly similar talent, and we'll get into that a little more lately. Lastly, you said, what would you suggest that dynasty owners target when it comes to rookie drafts, 2020 rookie picks? Are we selling them off? Are we buying them? If we're buying them, which ones are we buying? So this would be my main suggestion. If you want to buy a 2020 first round pick, specifically a 2020 first, not the time, because in the offseason, directly after the NFL draft, rookie picks for the next class are at an all-time high in terms of value. And think about it logically. NFL draft happens, and then boom, immediately 2019 NFL draft takes place, 2020 NFL mock drafts come out right away. That's just how it happens. Matt Miller, all those guys, they just release them because they get clicks. People read these mock drafts, they're like, wow, this guy has Jerry Jeudy going overall to the Dolphins. Like, maybe I should invest in these 2020 first round picks if the class is going to be this good. That's just how it works every year. So if you're buying first, don't buy them now. Buy them in season when teams are trying to contend. However, the picks that you should buy now, the seconds, the thirds, the fourths, the fifths, the sixth, if your draft goes that far, just buy picks that are not first right now, because those are always undervalued, especially in the offseason. Dynasty owners want those first, but they, for some reason, view those seconds as just like toss-ins. Like, let's say you have a 2020 first that's looking like it's going to be the 112. People value that as gold because it has a 1 next to it. It's a 2021. But then look at this 2020 second from a horrible team. It's probably going to be the 201, but it's just like a toss-in to get a guy like, Austin Hooper for some reason. I'll never understand it, and that is definitely something that should be exploited every year. That is probably the most important advice I can give on this class.
Yeah, and even if you want to talk about it for the 2019 draft class, I was at 201 on the spot. I bought someone's 2019 second pick, and he ended up being a last place finisher. So I had the 201, and I was spoiled with McCole Hardman and Noah Fant, two really, really, really good players, just from a throw-in. I mean, I was super happy. I didn't necessarily expect it to be 201 because it was a startup, but I see your point. Sometimes target those seconds. The only thing I disagree with is, or kind of have caution on, and I'm sure we'll get into a little bit more of this later, is I don't know if you remember, let's rewind to a year ago, right? Some of the Dynasty Devy community, they were super high in some running backs, like Bryce Love, Rodney Anderson. Those guys, if we think about these guys now, they're like third, fourth round rookie picks, right? Got bad landing spots, got injured. And you always talk about how all the names in this 2020 class, not all of them are going to pan out. We could be high on a Jerry Jeudy. It just takes one injury, and he could be, gone from the league or something. Hopefully not. We want to see our Jerry Judys. But, for me, it's like, if those first are at a good, just kind of gauge how your league values these picks. If they're super high on them the first, maybe you should just kind of sell them and get it off your plate. You know what I mean? Always try to match the value. If those seconds are valuable, try to buy them. Because the class, in my opinion, is always going to be less deep than what we think. Good thing for 2020, there's like 1,000 names. So even if we 40% of those guys go to bad landing spots, we still got a solid 60%, probably 2 rounds there. But there's always going to be an injury or some bad draft capital or a crap landing spot that's going to really tank a player's value that you're high on. So, what do you think about that?
I definitely think it's a good point. And one thing that people don't understand is, you'd be shocked how few people understand this, but not everyone is going to hit. Not every rookie is going to hit. So that's why it's important to realize that, because if you stack together 8 2020 first, you're going to have 8 studs on your team. You might have 4. If you're lucky, you might have, 5 or 6. But you bring up the Bryce Loves and the Rodney Andersons, and those are fantastic points. But you look at guys, just purely look at the top guys that I mentioned. You have Travis Etienne, DeAndre Swift, and Jonathan Taylor. And they all have their fair share of question marks. Well, Jonathan Taylor for Wisconsin, if I'm not, I could be incorrect. I don't think I am. He either lost 3 starting offensive linemen this year. So if we can see Jonathan Taylor rush for another 2,000 yards behind this offensive line, or even an 1,700 yards behind his beaten up offensive line that is probably going to be filled with freshmen, then boom, like that checks that Bryce Love wasn't able to check because he wasn't productive throughout his entire collegiate career. Travis Etienne, we're looking at him, for example. He, maybe it's a bit easier to rush for 20 plus touchdowns, which he did this past season, when you have a threat like Trevor Lawrence at QB or Justin Ross and T. Higgins, lined up out wide. So hypothetically, one thing to look out for is, let's say Clemson gets ahead in a game, or let's say, God forbid, Trevor Lawrence goes down with an injury. It's important to keep an eye on if these guys can thrive in situations that they are not to. If Jonathan Taylor can prove that he can do well without this stud offensive line, if, for example, DeAndre Swift proves that he can continue to be efficient with an increased workload. The difference about these guys, the difference when it comes to these guys like Bryce Love and Rodney Anderson, is that situations changed and we saw them begin to struggle. Like with Bryce Love, boom, injury, immediately just wildly unproductive. Same thing with Rodney Anderson. That's an important thing to keep an eye on with these guys throughout the collegiate football season. But at this point, just purely from a talent perspective, that's all I'm basing it off of. All I can do is base purely off talent. These guys are 3 of the best running backs that I have seen in a good amount of time.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely a ton of talent. The odd thing is there's no clear-cut 101, unless maybe you're really, really high on Jerry Jeudy. Granted, these running backs are this good that I think it pushes Jeudy just a little bit down, because running backs will give more immediate production, more valuable position, right? So, and I kind of want to start off by breaking down these running backs here. So I wanted to start off somebody that you had a wonderful opportunity to do an interview with, actually. And I believe this guy's name is good old Eno Benjamin, someone I was not familiar with until I got more into Devi. Can you talk a little bit about the interview you had with him? I'm kind of curious because this is a big deal for the fantasy football community, especially when you just consider your just some Twitter account that started up really on the trend upwards, and you got to do an interview. So that's incredible, first of all. I give you another round of applause. But can you talk a little bit about this interview you had?
Yeah, for sure. Well, I reached out to a few college football players just on a whim. I was just like, hey, this would be a cool idea. Some of my guys over at Dynasty Football Factory, shout out to the DFF Devi department. But a few of those guys were like thinking about getting some interviews together. We got a linebacker from a D2 school, just like cool perspectives. I was like, you know what, dude? Just, linebacker from a D2 school, that's fantastic. I'm just going to go for it. Like, I'm just going to put it out there. I'm going to DM these guys. I'm going to get an interview. Like, I'm just going to do it. So I DM a few guys, no response. No one reads it, as I'm not surprised. Probably what I would bet. And then one day I get an email or a Twitter DM from this guy. His username is, it's like EB3 or something like that. I was like, EB3? I don't have any follower with the name EB3. Then I was like, oh my good God, it's Eno Benjamin. So he responded. He basically just said, sure, man, like if I have time within the next few days, I'll get back to you. You can either record it for me or type it up. So I 5 or 6 questions. I'll actually pull them up now so I can read a couple of them because I think it was really cool. But I just wrote him a few questions, and him being the awesome guy that he is, just came back and gave me some really cool responses. So while I'm pulling up these questions, real fast, I'll say his freshman season in Arizona State, which was 2 years ago, he wasn't really on the radar. He had 23 carries, 142 yards, and a touchdown. 6.2 solid, 6.2 yards per carry, but not really enough to get yourself on the radar. So 2018 comes along, 335 touches, over 1,900 yards, and 18 touchdowns. So he immediately shoots himself into, for me, top 4 Devy running back status. Just absolutely incredible season, incredible film, incredible numbers. And that's why it was so cool interviewing him. Okay, it's just pulled up, so I'll question. Let's see, here we go. All right. So one question I asked him was, what's one underrated skill you work on during every practice that the general public may not realize is so important to you? And he came back and said, I would say my eyes and feet. I spend a lot of time studying film on opponents and training my eyes on where they should be for the defenses, so I know what to expect, and it pays off big time during games. As well as being able to run a specific route with my feet and body, and also being able to make the cut with my eyes in the opposite direction, that's something that really helps my instinctual game. So just breaking that down a little bit, first off, when he sent that to me, I was like, oh my God, like that is such a good response. And second off, I read it, I was like, that actually makes sense. It's like that lines up well with how he actually plays the game. You turn on his film and you see that if a play breaks down or if something goes wrong, it's an instinctual, I would say he takes an instinctual route to overcome it. And you're like, oh, are you just spewing words? What are you saying? But you see, let's say he's supposed to, run straight up the middle, boom, linebacker shoots the gap. He's got a hand on him. Literally like it's nothing, like it's just instinct, boom, cut to the right, like immediate 90-degree lateral jump cut, and he's off. So when he said that, I was like, okay, like he actually does go through every possible instance of what may happen in practice, trains his body to react to these instances. I was like, that's the coolest thing ever. I just got a bunch of responses like that. Just such a cool experience, and it made me dive into the film even more, and then I just proceeded to fall in love even more, moved all the way up to my Devy RB4.
Yeah, I definitely think he had a huge workload. What I like to see was he caught, I think, 31 passes, maybe that's a little off, but 30 plus passes, I believe, which is awesome. That's kind of my threshold to show, okay, you can be a receiving back in the NFL. And he has that size. I think he's 5'9", 5'10", 5'11", somewhere in that range. 205. The weight's a little concerning if he's going to be handling that many touches, and I'm going to guess he's going to get even more touches when you remove a first-round wide receiver. I'd also like to apologize for my dog before I forget. She was just roughing. She likes to bark a lot at nothing. But getting back to Eno Benjamin, we kind of already talked a little bit about what he does on film. Do you have any more analysis of Eno Benjamin?
Yeah, I would say something you mentioned about his, height, weight, concern, stuff like that. Looking at Eno Benjamin's frame, he's 5'10", 201, as officially listed on sportsreference.com, which is usually a very reliable site. So then I go and look at LeSean McCoy's frame, and I see that he's 5'10", 208. So I go, okay, LeSean McCoy has shown that, he's stood the test of him. He may have fallen off a little bit, but the dude's like 31 years old. He's been a stud running back for 7-8 years, and he's got 7 pounds on Eno Benjamin. So looking at Eno from he'll have an entire year of college football left, off season in an NFL weight room. I don't really have the concerns that a lot of people have when it comes to height and weight, especially considering the fact that Eno's so great in the open field. He'll also be used as a pass catcher, which will also reduce his risk of injury, getting 300 touches between the tackles. Like, he's not going to get 300 carries. He's going to be a guy that can catch 50, 60 balls in the NFL. So I don't think his weight is a huge concern.
That's good to hear, because Etienne and Benjamin are some of the smaller backs, and I'd like to see them succeed here. And I want to move on here and get a little bit off the script of what I had written down here. Because I was just looking back, and you gave me a whole bunch of player comparisons. Just because I'm curious about kind of players and how they operate and who they're kind of like. Because I'm not a big film guy. But if you give me a player comparison, I can kind of imagine how they're like coming out of college, seeing them perform in the NFL, how they perform in situation A compared to B. So I like player comparisons. And speaking of both these smaller backs, you told me Travis Etienne reminds you of David Johnson. Now, I know that's not from a physical comp, because those two are fairly different, but it was kind of a stylistic comp. So, can you talk a little bit about why Travis Etienne reminds you of David Johnson? Which, at first, honestly, I looked at it, I was a little confused by. So educate me. Tell me why these two backs are more similar than maybe the consensus thinks they are.
All right, let's get it. Well, if we're looking at both of, their height and weight, David Johnson is a huge, huge, huge man. And Travis Etienne is a bit of a smaller guy. So when I see this David Johnson comparison, this is what I see on film. Of course, it's, he's not going to be David Johnson exactly, but that's who I see. And the biggest trait that screams DJ to me is absurd acceleration on the outside. The thing about Etienne is that when he either breaks to the left, breaks to the right, or busts through the line of scrimmage, and even has the tiniest hole opening thing, if a corner or if any defensive back takes the incorrect angle on Etienne, like if maybe they just don't take the correct angle, and this allows Etienne to just get that one extra step on the defensive back, it's done. Like it's 6, it's a touchdown, it's game over. Just stop running, don't hurt yourself, just let him go. Like genuinely absurd when this guy gets to the outside, and that's where I saw David Johnson. David Johnson, run through the line of scrimmage, break a tackle from a linebacker, and there's 5 yards of daylight in front of him, and there are cornerbacks crashing on him, but these guys run at him as opposed to taking the correct angle. We've seen it 10, 20 times, especially during his 2,000 plus yard season. He's gone. I mean, the dude's scoring a touchdown. That's just how it works if anyone takes an incorrect angle. And that's what I see in Etienne. I mean, if you go back and watch his film, I cannot remember specifically what game it was. No, I do. It was from Louisville. His game against Louisville, he showed absurd acceleration. He got to the outside, and you saw this cornerback that was 10 yards away from him laterally, but he was running towards him. Quite literally 5 steps. Etienne takes 5 steps, and the cornerback's 10 yards. And then he literally gets faster and faster as he keeps running. It's absolutely incredible. And I saw that. And in my notes, right when that play took place against Louisville, I just wrote down DJ ? That's why I love having the pen and paper in my hand. So it just screams it. Screams David Johnson.
Yeah, for me, I kind of thought, from novice to honestly no film experience, just kind of hearing these traits, he kind of reminded me a little bit of Travis Etienne here, a little bit of a Jamal Charles, in the fact that these two could break off a run anywhere they were at, right? Super fast guys. Maybe they won't handle 300 touches or 300 carries at least this season, but they're going to have high yards per carry, so they're going to have these explosive plays. And Travis Etienne, while he hasn't shown it in college, with the type of speed, agility, acceleration he has, can probably catch out of the backfield, hopefully, and make some incredible plays. Just the player you want in space because of what he can do with that football in his hand. So, I'm just curious. Ray said he kind of liked it. What do you think about that player comparison? My first player comparison. How'd I do?
I personally like it a lot, because if we're looking, I feel if we're looking at a guy that can just break off a big play, you could say Chris Johnson, but I don't really see the comparison with Chris Johnson as much, because Chris Johnson was more of a here's the ball, here's your hole, you're gone. But Etienne has fantastic lateral ability. He has great contact balance. That's something that a guy like Chris Johnson, another breakaway guy, doesn't have necessarily as much. But I think Jamal Charles is a great example because he had all these fantastic traits. He's the biggest reason why I like your comp is that Jamal Charles was a smaller framed guy, but he always had some absurd nose for the end zone. and that's ETN. We were talking about how he's a smaller running back. I believe he had 26 touchdowns this past year. So I think that's a great comp on your part. Just small guy that has a nose for the end zone. Like you toss down on your notes, boom, Jamal Charles. I liked it.
Thank you. I'll applaud myself here. Pat myself on the back. Here I am. So I kind of want to talk more running backs here, and today on this episode, I want to talk more about. Well, I guess we already talked about ETN. I want to move more away from talking about the Swifts and the Taylors, and hopefully everybody who's listening is not necessarily going to be a 101 owner or some. You know what I mean? I want people who are listening to be good and successful on their own. So I feel like some of these secondary names, like the Eno Benjamin, who we already talked about, and we're going to talk a little bit about J.K. Dobbins and Cam Akers, too, here in a moment. I just feel like these backs might be more important to the viewers because these guys could be sleepers that maybe go up to that tier, or maybe they slide a little bit more, but we know that their talent is very good. So let's start off here. Talk about Cam Akers for me. Do you have a player comparison? Where is he on your rankings? And what's your overall analysis on a guy like Cam Akers?
All right, well, Cam Akers coming out of high school was one of the most highly touted running backs in a long time. He was propped up immediately on Devy rankings before he even took an NFL snap. And being personally from Tallahassee, I've lived there for the past 13 years. I'm in college now, but the past 13 years I've been in Tallahassee, a fair share of FSU games. And watching that guy live is fantastic. I'll just say that first of all. He is a special player, just fantastic out of the backfield. But let's start talk about a player comp here. Some guy that I see, flashes in Akers. Like I mentioned to you earlier, I see a little James Conner. A little bit of James Conner, more athletic, a little more wiggle, and maybe a little less power. Then people look at Cam Akers' yards per carry this past year. They're like, okay, if he had more wiggle, then why did he average, I want to say 4.4 yards per carry, which is very low for a college running back, especially one that's touted so highly. It's like 4.4 yards per carry. You said this guy was James Conner, but he had more wiggle and burst and speed. So how does that even make sense? Well, purely from the numbers perspective, you're right. But take a look at the offensive line. FSU had, I honestly think, the worst rated offensive line this past season. So keep that in mind when ranking a guy like Akers. Now, let's say he has another sub 5 yard per carry season after the offensive line improves and then decides to enter the NFL draft. Then, okay, this is a serious concern. But heading into year 3 of college, offensive line hopefully improves. I think we'll see Akers' play improve overall. And currently my Devy RB5, I could very easily see an instance where he moves up into the top 3. Akers, I think, on film shows incredible traits because he was the lone bright spot in that FSU offense. He made a play and then everyone noticed because, the dude's special. So overall, Devy RB5 could easily move down if this yards per carry struggles again after offensive line play improves. But overall, I'd expect not a huge rise because you can only rise so much from RB5, but I'd expect a solid rise from Cam Akers because I think he's going to improve on that 4.4 yards per carry.
Yeah, definitely. We do look for improvement. We should expect some improvement, but you know what I mean? Like, it's hard because we want to evaluate what they are now and not what they could be. Because when we think about what they could be, that's where some of the bias and some of the kind of the preconceived kind of notions come into film. So I think Cam Akers, hey man, the ceiling is the roof, right? I think he has a really, really, really high ceiling. That's pretty high up there. Talking about the roof. So I want to move on to somebody I'm interested in. I'm going to kind of ask you the same 3 things because I like it, especially for viewers who aren't as much into film. I feel like player comparisons we can kind of almost imagine it a little bit better because I'm not a great film guy. Not everyone's going to be a great film guy. A lot of work goes into it. So J.K. Dobbins was a name I wasn't too familiar with. And he's a player that interests me a lot because I kind of just didn't hear much about him until now. He kind of just popped out of nowhere, kind of like Eno Benjamin, but I'm a little less familiar with him. So can you talk a little bit about where he is on your ranking, some analysis of his play, and what player, or we can do something like this. Does he show shades of a couple players kind of combined? Okay, all right, let's break down J.K. Dobbins then.
All right, for sure. Well, looking at J.K. Dobbins, he is definitely someone who I was absurdly high on after his freshman year. He had 194 carries, 1,400 yards, 7 touchdowns, 7.2 yards per carry. Then in 2018, this past year, I kind of took my foot off the gas pedal a little bit. 230 carries. So he had 36 more carries, but for 350 less yards. He had 230 carries for 1,053 yards, 4.6 yards per carry. Looking at J.K. Dobbins' film, freshman year versus sophomore year, you're like, okay, what changed? I mean, they had Dwayne Haskins in 2018, so you would think that an impressive passer like Haskins would open up more rushing lanes, and you should be right. But if you're looking at his 2017 film, you're going to see a guy with burst. You're going to see a guy with quickness, impressive lateral agility. It was probably Devi RB2 for the majority of people behind Jonathan Taylor. But then you look at his 2018 film, for some reason he looks a little like his cleats are a little heavier, like he's a little less quick in and out of his cuts, a little less burst. And while I like Dobbins, he's my RB6, he averaged 4.6 yards per carry. Again, yards per carry can be a very deceptive number, but after he averaged 7.2 yards per carry, to go back down to 4.6 yards per carry is definitely something that's going to make me raise my eyebrow. So he's a guy that I'm keeping a very close eye on because I want to see if he kind of gets some of that wiggle back, some of that burst, that explosion from 2017. If I had to choose a comparison for him, I would say Doug Martin, which can be a good thing and a bad thing. Doug Martin was a stud coming out, but as he got a little older, just a few years older, he started to play like his cleats were a little heavier, like I mentioned earlier with Dobbins. So that's kind of the comp that I see. He could also either move way up if he shows his 2017 traits, or continue to move down if he proceeds to show that his burst is going away.
Yeah, 100%. Definitely a guy that might fit more in a committee system. Definitely. I don't know any committee teams right now on the top of my head that could need a running back. Maybe like the Jets, and he could be used hopefully a little more than like a Kenyon Drake. Maybe if they trade Le'Veon Bell. That's just probably the worst example I could think of, but something like that, where maybe he needs another back to alleviate some touches so he can stay efficient. I don't think he's had any injury concerns, but staying efficient is pretty important probably, and would help everybody, dynasty owners, the team, whatever, right? So I kind of want to break down two wide receivers here. And these are some more of, not the upper echelon names like the Jerry Jeudy, but and then some people like Ray were super high on Jalen Reagor, so we talked a lot about him, who I think is honestly a perfect fit, especially seeing Marquise Hollywood Brown go the first wide receiver off the board, which was a surprise to some. Kind of a smaller, shiftier guy, catches a lot of passes. That's kind of where the NFL is, right? Separation is key. So, moving away from those two guys, talk to me about CeeDee Lamb. What do you see in CeeDee Lamb? Kind of the same three kind of things I want to talk about here with him.
Perfect. Okay. So this man, CeeDee Lamb, is so exciting to watch. Like, so exciting to watch. There's no doubt in my mind that he was the best receiver on Oklahoma this season. Marquise Brown's a perfectly fine player. I don't think he's even comparable to CeeDee Lamb. And I'm not sure if you've seen the play that I'm about to refer to, but CeeDee Lamb has made the most impressive that I have ever seen in my entire life. Probably number 2 behind the Odell catch. The second most impressive catch I've ever seen in my entire life didn't count. If you have not seen that play, I would suggest looking it up right when we get off this podcast, because it'll probably make you move him up your rankings. Just look up CeeDee Lamb catch and it'll pop up. But I digress. Looking at this guy's film, he's a big body receiver, but it doesn't show. You would think he's 5'10". You would think he's 5'9" based on the way he separates, based on his speed, based on his quickness, based on the way he goes up and gets the ball. His ability as a deep threat, an intermediate threat. My player comparison for CeeDee Lamb was, this wasn't your typical cookie cutter comparison like the other players, I wrote down here that I saw a more refined Mike Williams with less touchdown upside. And I think that still holds true because Mike Williams is the 6'3" touchdown animal because he's this big body guy and he'll box you out and he'll jump higher than you with his 40+ inch vertical. CeeDee Lamb has a bit of a smaller frame, but he's the more refined route runner. He's more athletic in terms of long speed, in terms of quickness in and out of breaks. Now, you have to think about who he had throwing him the ball at Oklahoma. That's one important thing to keep in mind. 2017, he put up 46 receptions, 807 yards, 7 touchdowns, with the one and only Baker Mayfield at quarterback. And in 2018, had 65 receptions, over 1,100 yards, and 11 touchdowns. Another extremely impressive season, but with another first overall pick throwing to him. So this third year is going to be extremely impressive for CeeDee Lamb. If he can put up 70+ receptions, 1,200+ yards, and improve on his 11 touchdowns or even stay the same, he's moving up my rankings. I mean, to think about the fact that CeeDee Lamb, I would say, is currently, in terms of the 2020 class, he's we'll say, 106 in non-Superflex leagues. To have a 106 that has put up the stats that he has, put up over 1,100 yards and 11 touchdowns his sophomore year, probably going to improve upon those numbers in his junior year, to be the 106, I mean, that alone is, this 2020 class is, I'm confident, going to be all it's been hyped up to be.
Yeah, 100%. So for me, I just pulled out the one-handed catch. So I'm going to play here so we can get this live reaction. I figured you might want to hear it. So I'm going to hit play here. I'm just kind of curious for you. So where does he rank in as your wide receiver? Is he your wide receiver 2?
He's currently my wide receiver 3 behind Jerry Jeudy and Laviska Shenault out of Colorado. But I could easily see an instance where I move CeeDee Lamb up to my wide receiver 2.
Okay. I just saw the catch, and this is holy wow. He just kind of just grabbed it. He kind of just throws his hand, just kind of grabs it like unexpectedly. Wow, that's a pretty
It doesn't even make sense. It's like a Venus flytrap, hand covered in stickum kind of catch.
Yeah, because it isn't even really. He kind of just swipes it out of the air. It almost looks like because he's spinning too.
Exactly.
Wow. Some great hands there, definitely. I guess I want to bring up 2 names here for you before we start to conclude the podcast. I'll kind of throw them in. Even I think they're a little similar and a little different. I want to bring up Tyler Johnson and Laviska Shenault because you brought up Laviska Shenault, and I'm curious why he's your wide receiver 2. We have people on right who's a little lower than Laviska Shenault. We have people who say Laviska Shenault's wide receiver 1 over Jerry Jeudy. A little polarizing. And then Tyler Johnson. They're both bigger wide receivers, I think is fair. I forget Tyler Johnson's height, but I feel like it's over 6 feet or 6 feet, something around that. So they're both bigger wide receivers. Visca's a little bit bigger. Both go to smaller schools with not as great quarterbacks. Can you kind of talk about both of them, where you have them ranked? Just overall analysis on those 2 players.
Yeah, let's do it. We'll start off with Tyler Johnson. All right, so one of my favorite wide receivers in the entire NFL is Keenan Allen. And I love Keenan Allen because his quickness in and out of cuts. One thing that people underrate that's important to look at on film is how they, I would say, pull off the subtleties. Keenan Allen's fantastic at, looking in one direction yet cutting the other, making it seem as if the ball is being thrown to get the cornerback to hesitate and continuing to run. Fakes, all those types of things. Those are all things that Tyler Johnson does incredibly well, and his route running reminds me of Keenan Allen. I think I currently have Tyler Johnson as my 2020 wide receiver 6. I could also absolutely see an instance in which he proceeds to move up the ranks, but he is a bigger receiver, similar frame to Keenan Allen. He's fantastic at going up and getting the ball. He's a fantastic receiver when it comes to running slants. You think of a guy like Devontae Adams and Keenan Allen, just think about how they do the thing where they, take a step, plant their foot in the ground, make it look to the defender like they're running in one direction, cutting in the other direction. Doug Baldwin's another example. Tyler Johnson is fantastic at pulling off subtleties like that. Overall, route running is one of the biggest things I look at when scouting wide receivers. So he box for me, his hands, his production, it's all there. So it hurts me to rank him at wide receiver 6, but that's how impressive this class is. If we were talking 2019 class, he'd be a top 3 receiver for me. Absolutely no questions asked. And then we go over, look at a guy like Laviska Shenault. He's the wide receiver 1 for many people. I don't necessarily see that as a potential outcome for him unless he has an extremely impressive 2019 season. But I would say, looking at his stats from last season, 86 receptions, a little over 1,000 yards, and 6 touchdowns. The reason why I don't see that wide receiver 1 upside from him is that he averaged 11.8 yards per catch, which is nothing crazy, nothing incredibly explosive. He operates in the short field while his game is extremely impressive down the field. He's more of an intermediate threat as opposed to one Jerry Jeudy for me, who can really operate anywhere on the field. I think Chenault's an extremely impressive player, but the one major knock I have on him is health. Past 2 years, only 2 years in college, he's played 7 games his freshman year, 9 games his sophomore year, and a lot of it is due to foot injuries. That is a big red flag for me. If he played, maybe only missed 2 games per season the past 2 years, and instead of 1,000 yards, he has 1,400 yards and 11 touchdowns instead of 6, then I'd be a little more optimistic, but foot injuries just concern me. Just foot injuries for wide receivers, those could be lingering things. It's possible they're Julio Jones and they overcome the injuries and proceed to have 1,400-yard seasons, but that's just a red flag for me. That doesn't have him quite as high as maybe he could be, even though he's still my wide receiver too.
Yeah, you're definitely very high on him, I think. And overall, this class is just the potential of this class could be really, really high. And it's going to be hard for it to bust unless all these players really have bad years or get injured, just because there's so much depth. And that's just such an incredible class. And 2020 may be the last time for a while, just kind of looking at the running back landscape, especially. Maybe the wide receiver landscape. You could always use more wide receivers, though, especially with 3 wide receiver sets becoming more and more popular. So the running back landscape, getting back to that, we're almost kind of out of running back spots before it starts becoming heavy committees. So this 2020 class should shore up a lot of the running backs, and then eventually we'll see like the Le'Veon Bells, the David Johnsons, to get really old, and they'll be replaced in a couple of years, and it'll be kind of sad to, just because the running back life shelf and how common these running backs are being pumped out. It's like a factory. It's ridiculous. So what do you think about that?
I mean, I totally agree in the sense that I think that there are a perfect number of committee backfields in the NFL compared to the number of running backs that I think could come out and immediately take over a starting role. For example, if I'm looking at NFL teams and which teams currently have a committee or which teams currently have impending free agents after the season, look at teams like the Bucks. You look at teams like the Texans with Lamar Miller becoming a free agent after the season. Look at a team like the Bills, who have third-round capital invested in Devin Singletary, could definitely use a stud to help out Josh Allen. I see about 7 or 8 of those types of roles available in the NFL, and about 7 or 8 running backs that I think could step in and really produce top-end numbers. That just feeds into my excitement for this 2020 class, because not only do I think there are studs, I think there's more open and available positions for starting running backs than a lot of people think.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, guys like Marlon Mack, James Conner, some of those 2017 guys who, have performed at a high level. All it takes is one injury, or maybe those teams kind of meet up with like the draft capital and kind of where they are on the big board for those teams, and they just kind of take them, and then those running backs go down. And those are 2 great spots, obviously. So overall, I want to thank you so much for being on here today. But I have one final question here for you regarding fantasy football, and that is, So if I'm a listener of the podcast, right, which I hope you are, I hope you've enjoyed so far, what is kind of the biggest tip, takeaway, or advice from what we've talked about today here that if I was listening, what's the one thing you want me to learn from today and continue to think about, process, just kind of be aware about in my fantasy football endeavors?
All right, for sure. Well, if we're looking on how to better your dynasty team, I would say don't overpay for first round picks for 2021. They will never, ever, ever be more expensive than they are now, except right before the 2020 draft. However, go out and buy 2020 seconds, thirds, fourths, and fifths because this is the cheapest you'll actually be able to get them. Since firsts are being valued so highly, it's kind of pushing down the value of those picks. I don't understand why, but that's just how it works. Looking from just how to potentially better yourself as an overall fantasy player, there's no such thing. I don't think there's really a such thing as being bad at watching film. You take a pen, you take a piece of paper, or you take your computer, take a Word document, Google Doc, whatever you do. Watch some film, not highlights. That's important. Watch film, watch game film, and just write down what you see. Yes, whoever's listening, just try it. I mean, first off, it's a lot of fun. But second off, it gives you a better idea of what to look for when you're just watching a normal football game. It just makes the watching experience more fun. And it's also such an amazing feeling when you take notes on a player's film a year or two before they get drafted, they end up getting drafted highly and they end up succeeding in the NFL. I mean, there's no bigger pat on the back than basically saying, yeah, your process is your process is hitting. So I would say those are my biggest suggestions. Just give it a shot. Just write down what you see. Watch some film.
Hey, maybe I should start doing that. That seems like definitely something I should invest my time into. That way I can use film and statistics to really put together such a great analysis on a player, and maybe I hit more and bust less than some guys. So is there anything else you want to talk about here?
I think we covered it all. Just for having me on. I mean, I had a blast. We had a solid hour and a half of just talking some good old dynasty, Devi, and life. It was awesome, man. Thank you.
Yeah, no problem. My final question here is, I have one more question for you.
For sure.
Where can I find, if I'm a viewer, where can I find you if I want to check out more of your work?
To check out my work, I currently write at Dynasty Nerds and Dynasty Football Factory. But if you're interested in seeing any of that or getting in contact with me at all, my DMs are open to whether you follow me or don't follow me on Twitter. My DMs are open to everyone at DynastyFF_Kyle M. I mean, ask me anything. Ask me questions about your team. Ask me fantasy advice. Talk to me about life. The DMs are open. If you want to get in contact with me, just shoot me a DM. I'll respond as quick as I can.
Awesome. I really do appreciate that. If you guys like this interview, make sure to give it a rating, give it a thumbs up if you're listening on YouTube, give it a rating if you're listening on Apple Podcasts or iTunes. I'd love to have Kyle back on if he's interested, and definitely ratings help show me that you guys want him on too. So, hey, if he wants to be back on and you guys want him back on, hopefully we'll have him back on then. But I'd like to thank you so much, Kyle, for taking time out of your day here on this wonderful Wednesday, which we're recording, to talk a lot about fantasy football. And I'm just really appreciative. So I hope you have a fantastic rest of your day, Kyle. And those same regards go to our viewers. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your day. Stay tuned. We got more content coming soon. Guys, remember, like Kyle said, try to buy those later picks and, go watch some film. So I'm going to leave you guys be. Go watch some film now, since Kyle told you to, and have a fantastic rest of your day.